Okay, this is one of my favorite lectures to give. It's on deviance. Actually, when I was doing my PhD, this is what I did it on. Try to tell that to your parents. They think it's a big waste of money. Anyway, this is Albert Einstein. He was a deviant, and this is what he says. The one who follows the crowd will usually get no further than the crowd. The one who walks alone, this reminds me of when I'm hiking because I go so far off the trail, is likely to find himself in places no one else has ever been. So I've got a few quotes about Deviance. I'm a big 1984 freak. I don't know if you can see this tattoo over here, but anyway, it's a 1984 tattoo. But to tell the truth is the most radical thing you can do, according to George Orwell. I have this Harry S. Truman quote as well. It says, and it's kind of ironic, it's from him, but once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one way to go. Think about our country right now. Increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all its citizens. Okay, so when I was doing my PhD, I studied this research from Moscovici and also Charlotte Nemeth. And a lot of people have been focusing on conformity back in the day. And so they started to focus on deviance specifically, but in a good way. And what they said is this that majorities tend to promote consensus, convergent thinking norms, like laws and things, so that we have structure. And that's a good thing. I'm not against structure. I want laws against rape and murder too. But a lot of times, this convergent thinking our thought processes is not always the best thing. So when it comes to creativity, minorities do play an important role within our society because they promote conflict. We need the minority. Everybody thinks it's a bad thing, but we need the minority, the deviant, because they encourage different kinds of modes of thinking, different kinds of thought. Now, sometimes this creativity can be bad, Ted Bundy or, whatever, Jeffrey Dahmer. But a lot of times, this creativity is the creativity of the artist or the creator that we'll talk about here in just a minute. Now, Socrates, you can't see his name over here, is one of my favorite people to talk about. In Plato's Apology, recounts the trial of Socrates where he was put to death. And so here is the accusation against Socrates that I usually talk about is that he's guilty of corrupting the youth, like this guy right here, and talking about, all this God stuff he's not supposed to be talking about. And this is what he goes on to say. If you firmly oppose the multitude, there's one thing that's going to happen to you. You're going to get killed. I don't care if it's Athens or somewhere else. And so before he gets killed, he makes this final appeal. And the final appeal is this. He says he's like a gadfly, a horsefly, and there's a horse. The horse is the state. The state is big and fat. It doesn't want to change, just like rich people. If you're rich, you should be conservative. I'm liberal because I'm poorer. You know what I mean? But if I was richer, I'd be conservative because the horse doesn't want it to change. It has all the stuff, but the minority wants to change because it doesn't. And so the fly is buzzing around the horse and it's saying change, and the horse is like, I'm bigger than you. But eventually, because it pesters the horse, it plays this important role within our society, and it sparks, promotes. So here you have the average, the middle, and you have kind of like negative and positive, kinds of deviance. I was a statistician for the Gallup organization and other people in corporate America for a long time. But, we call these ends, these fringe, the lunatic fringe, like the fringe of the carpet, the deviant. So you can deviate in a bad way or a good way. Sorry about the Judeo-Christian thing, but that's the way I got raised. You know what I mean? But most of us aren't Jesus or the devil. We're in the middle. We have a duality going on. So I want to talk about deviance. Oh, I forgot I had this thing because I think Jesus is the ultimate deviant. He was just like, okay, I'm going to stand up against, all the establishment, not only the Hebrew establishment, but the Roman establishment. And this is what he says about if you're going to be a Christian. So I'm not going to try to make you a Christian, but I teach religion class and I talk about his role and his deviance within that. Okay, so the way I see it, you have like conformity and deviance can both be good and bad. Because if I call you a conformist, it's kind of an insult. If I call you a deviant, it's kind of an insult too. But good conformity would be like laws against rape and murder. Bad conformity would be like when I talk about Jim Crow laws within my class on prejudice and discrimination. Now, the gadflies would have been talking about like Socrates comes to change the bad norm, if you can think about it that way. But see, I have these little shoes on here for a reason. We have knuckleheads that screw it up, fuck it up for everybody. What does that mean? It's like, remember the shoe bomber? Before the shoe bomber, we could wear these things called shoes on our feet when we got onto a plane. Now we can't. One guy. I always say, if you think one guy can't change society, shoe bomber did. He completely changed society. That means gadflies can change society too. So what I wanted to do, oh, I forgot to add this from the Dalai Lama. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. Now, I'll talk about this in detail here in just a minute. How gadflies bite bad horses, they change the establishment for the good, and also how bad flies, knuckleheads, fuck up a perfectly good thing, which would be like going to the airport and keeping your shoes on. Okay, I'm back again. I'm going to talk about gadflies, or what I consider to be gadflies, because it's in the eye of the beholder, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. This is the horsefly. I don't know if you've ever been bitten by a horsefly, but it hurts like shit. They can really bite. So this is Martin Luther. I talk about him a lot because what did he do? In 1517, he went up to the church door at Wittenberg and he nailed a copy of 95 things he didn't like about the Catholic Church to the door. It's like that's pretty ballsy because the church is like in the middle of the Inquisition. They can do things to you. He actually had to go into hiding at one point. Eventually, there's the diet of worms, and I don't want to get into all this, but his protest against the church led to the Protestant Reformation, which led to Protestants, Protestants, because they were protesting the Catholic Church. Okay, so this is the schism that happened in the 1500s. There was an earlier schism. I don't want to get into all that stuff right now. Now, one of the things we used to think about is that the Earth was the center of the universe. And then eventually, people came along to challenge that. That's like the horse. We would have always believed this. And so Copernicus came along to challenge it in the 1540s. Yes, I was right. This is what kind of starts the scientific revolution, is that he challenges the teachings that the Catholic Church is, ordaining. And as he challenges these teachings, he butts heads. And it's heresy in a way, but this kind of heresy starts to bring us out of the Dark Ages. Otherwise, if we didn't have these deviants, we would still be in the Dark Ages. Now we think about the sun, maybe not the center of the universe, but the center of our solar system and how we revolve around the sun, and we're not Earth centric in this way. Okay, so we also used to believe that the Earth was flat. I love this picture right here. It's so cool looking that you would just sail right off the edge of the Earth. Now, sometimes I think this is a horrible example because I live right here in Arizona with a lot of indigenous people. I'm right on a reservation as we speak because Christopher Columbus challenged this, flat Earth, and he thought he could circumnavigate the globe, but then he landed over here in America and called everybody Indians because he thought he was India. I can't believe we still have, that word associated with like Indian School Road and things like that because it's indigenous. Okay, so Albert Einstein again. Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. One of the things I do as an extra credit assignment sometimes, probably not this semester, but sometimes I do this, is the have you read parts of Civil Disobedience from Henry David Thoreau because he talks about how to disobey authority. You just don't do it in a willy-nilly way or a destructive way. There's a positive way to do it. And my favorite gadfly of all times is Rosa Parks because she did something so important and so simple in 1955. She refused to give up her seat on the bus. The rule is if you're black and the bus is packed and a white person gets on the bus, they get to have your seat because you're black. They trump you. And she was like, no, I'm not doing it. I am not giving my seat up. So you can see her mugshot right here. I actually have it right by my desk. I look at it every single day. And it reminds me of the simple act, just like the shoe bomber changed the world. Rosa Parks changed the world because just about 50 years later, Obama was president. Whether you love him or hate him, he was of color. At this point, you couldn't even ride the bus in a sensible fashion. Okay, so here he is, my hero, Martin Luther King. I love him to death. I used to live in Atlanta, just right within walking distance of Ebenezer Baptist Church on Sweet Auburn. And this is what he says. If you break the law because your heart's telling you that it's wrong, then in reality, that's the highest respect for the law. And so there were Jim Crow laws. I mentioned these earlier that prevented black people from voting in the Deep South. You had to pass all these tests, and then plus you just had to get to the center. And, there was white folks that prevented that too. And so the whole movie Selma is about this, is that he went, down to Selma to challenge this in 1963. I was born in 66, and so it wasn't just that they challenged it in this civil, they were civil about it. They used passive resistance, but they were met with force. He talks about how soul force is met with brute force, or vice versa, brute force is met with soul force. And so you can see what happens to people when they deviate against the horse, but the white establishment had to have this deviance. Otherwise, we wouldn't have desegregation. And I grew up with this nonsense because I grew up in a place where it was highly segregated. And this is definitely why I'm a social psychologist. Okay, Gandhi, another one of my heroes, another Hellraiser. He goes against the Raj, R-A-J, the British rule within India, Mother India. He doesn't use guns. He uses his mouth. And he takes some beatings and almost starves to death. And this is what he says: I cannot teach you violence. I do not believe in it. I can only teach you not to bow your heads. That's, to me, what's the ballsiest thing in the world, is when you nut up and you stand up and you don't fucking have a gun in your hand. Bad flies. Sometimes people are deviants, and if you think about deviants, perverts, all these different words we have, but I'm fascinated with certain kind of bad flies, like outlaws. We live right here in the Wild Wild West. Jesse James, Billy the Kid, but the modern day outlaws, like the serial killers. I don't know why I'm fascinated with them, but I just am. So this is Timothy McVeigh. I was just thinking about him the other day because, based on that movie Imperium talks about him because he did this based on the Turner Diaries, and that he, wanted to start, whatever, this anti, uh establishment, kind of movement. He was like a militia. But anyway, this isn't civil disobedience. This is biting the horse in a really violent way, which leads to these two knuckleheads that started it all. 420, Columbine, seem like such sweet boys, but since then, just school shootings have just been out of control. It's like everybody wonders why they have them, but this is the thing. You get a fly that gets all freaked out and feels marginalized and like they don't have a voice. I'm not saying it's right, but they get all this anger and then spit it back out on society. And this is the opposite of what Henry David Thoreau is talking about. Now, sometimes they use those Osama bin Laden. I guess some of y'all are younger, might not even remember 9/11 now. But if you were like a radical Muslim, you would see this as a heroic act, like he's a gadfly. And if you're an American, you see him as a bad fly. And this is the perfect example of it's an eye of the beholder, whether or not the person's a gadfly or okay, so that's what I'm talking about right now. Sometimes it's your both. You think, oh, well, if you think about celebrities, a lot of times they have this duality. I usually talk about tortured artists here, Salvador Dali. I love this quote. There's only one difference between a madman and me. This guy right here. The crazy person will tell you that they're not crazy. Salvador Dali will tell you he's crazy. One of my favorite quotes from Salvador Dali, besides this one, is this. They ask him, did he do drugs? And Salvador Dali says, I don't do drugs. I am drugs. Okay, so a lot of artists have been tortured and have this duality. Edgar Allan Poe, died of alcoholism. Vincent van Gogh. Most of us, don't lop one of our ears off when we get upset with our girlfriend. But I think their craziness is what makes them good. Jack Kerouac died cirrhosis of the liver, but he started he was an influential part of the beatnik movement. Papa, Ernest Hemingway, shot himself in the face. Oh, I forgot. I have Philip K. Dick on here. He's one of my favorite people to talk about. Who is he? He's this dude that used to live in Oakland, California, and he would haul up in an apartment and do a ton of crystal meth, and we would write. He would write all these books. One of his books was 6,000 pages. It's crazy. I wouldn't read a 600-page book, but anyway, that's a whole nother story. when he got near to dying and then eventually died, people started getting some of these manuscripts and then they started turning them into movies and he changed the whole face of science fiction because they've made these movies like Minority Report and Adjustment Bureau and Blade Runner was the first one and Total Recall, Paycheck. This is a Scanner Darkly that you can't see, but there were so many different movies that came out of his schizophrenic mind. And if he hadn't had kind of that crystal methy experience, I should say, he would all these kind of have the I'm on the run, I'm kind of paranoid, who am I, especially Scanner Darkly, and that paranoia kind of fueled in a good and bad way his creativity. William S. Burroughs over here, A Naked Lunch, Hunter S. Thompson. He loved Ernest Hemingway. And this is one of his quotes: I hate to advocate drugs, alcohol, violence, or insanity, but they've always worked for me. And then Johnny Depp is a big Hunter S. Thompson freak. If you've seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Okay. Oh, I forgot I had this on here. Comedians are the perfect example of the duality. I mean, Chris Farley, I was just watching Tommy Boy the other day, and it's like he's so funny, but he was also such a lonely, tortured soul, and people didn't see that. The last 3 days of his life, he was holed up with a hooker with a bunch of heroin and coke, and then he eventually overdosed, and she left because she goes, I'm out of here. I can't take this. I don't care what you pay me. I hate to show this picture, but one of my favorite people of all time. Here he is. I don't want to start crying right here on TV. But God, sucks that Robin Williams isn't here. Duality. Another thing is Forever 27. You know how all these really creative people aren't here with us anymore. When I think about Forever 27, I don't know if she was 27, but Amy Winehouse is the best. If you don't like Amy Winehouse, I don't understand you. She's like the modern day Billie Holiday, and but her genius is the fact that she was addicted to crack and everything else under the sun, and it's like her torture was her genius, just like with Billie Holiday. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is the Damascus effect. Sometimes you're a bad fly, and then something happens. You have a conversion experience. I don't want to talk about me in Peru right now, but something happens to you, and you change your ways. So Malcolm X is one of those people, and I'm going to show you this little movie where he talks about the price of deviance right here.
No Negro leaders have fought for civil rights.
What do you mean
They
by
have
fought?
begged for civil rights. They have begged the white man for civil rights. They have begged the white man for freedom. And anytime you beg another man to set you free, you will never be free. Freedom is something that you have to do for yourselves. And until the American Negro lets the white man know that we are really ready and willing to pay the price that is necessary for freedom, our people will always be walking around here second-class citizens, or what you call 20th century slaves.
What price are you talking about, sir?
The price of freedom is death.
The price of freedom is death. I love that. Okay, so the last guy I'll talk about here, love him because you see this picture over here. That's the guy that runs the yard, literally, because he founded the Crips and he went to death row when he was sentenced to, I think there were 7 murders he was sentenced for. Anyway, he did something radical in prison. He renounced his gang membership and affiliation to the Crips, and then he was a target by the Bloods, the Crips, everybody. So he went solo in prison. Then he started writing these books and he wrote all these little books to try to prevent, at-risk youth getting into gangs. And because he had an insider point of view, it became very popular. Eventually became so popular that he got nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is pretty good deal. You know what I mean? Big deal for a gangster in prison. Okay. Last things last is fallen angels. Sometimes we have these people that we say, oh, look how great they are. And then they become a deviant in a bad way. We love this in a way. I mean, think about OJ. I don't know what you think about, but remember Pistorius? It's like, oh, he runs with no legs, but then he shot his girlfriend. Or think about Kevin Spacey or Matt Lauer. So we have these people that fall from grace as well. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that lecture on deviance. We'll see you next time.